So before the gig even starts, the important thing is to get there ahead of time and set the stage as close as possible to what your artist is needing for their sets. So however many wedges that they need, what mics they need and where, if you've got drums, bass, guitars, vocals, where they are, and then also ring out your wedges before the artist even shows up. This makes sound check when the artist comes to load in and set up, makes it so that the stage is already set, they can just insert themselves on the stage, everything happens a lot more quickly. Then there's less feedback from the get-go when the artist steps up to the microphone, and it's a little less stressful for everybody involved. So you want to make sure that you get all of those things done ahead of time. It's better for you, it's better for the artist, and it saves a lot of time and stress in the long run. When the artist comes in and starts setting up, it's very important to introduce yourself. Be very confident in your abilities and who you are, because this is your stage and this is your show. You want to create an environment of respect for both between yourself and the artist, and also trust, because they need to know who you are if they need any monitor changes, and especially if you're running both monitors and front of house. You're probably going to be running around the venue listening to things, and you may not be able to keep your eyes on the stage at all times. You may not be close to the stage at all times. So if the artist needs to call to you during sound check or during the show to ask for any monitor changes, make sure they know who you are. So what I like to do is I like to stand up nice and tall. You offer them a firm handshake, you introduce yourself, and you let them know, hey, like for example, hi, I'm Willa, I'm running your sound tonight, or I'm running your monitors tonight. And that gives them a point of contact, you've met each other, and then they can tell you, hi, I'm Bob, and I'm the drummer. And you can also use the time to talk about their monitor mix, like, hey, we've got this right here. Tell me a little bit about what you like to hear in your wedge, and this way you can kind of preset their mix a little bit, and also makes things a little bit faster. It's very, very important you establish that trust, and it makes it more comfortable, especially if you're meeting them for the first time, you've never worked with them before. They might be on tour. Oftentimes they may have been working with sound people who aren't super nice and didn't really seem to care. So this allows them to feel already a lot more at ease with having someone else in control of their sound, because they can't hear what's happening in the house. So if you treat them really well on your stage, they're going to trust you with the front of house mix a little bit more. For monitors, it's important to note that you are mixing for the artist. You are not mixing for yourself. So it doesn't matter if the mix, it sounds good to you, because your opinion no longer matters. You are not the one in front of that wedge. You're not the one wearing the in-ear monitors. They are, and they need to hear whatever it is that they need to hear as clearly as possible. Now with wedges, you don't have as much room to play around with in terms of sending effects to wedge. If you send a reverb or a delay or any sort of effects to your wedges, that increases the probability of feedback. It can be done. Just make sure you ring out your wedge really, really well before you bring that reverb in, and also check once you bring the reverb in to make sure it's nice and stable and you have enough headroom. But with ears, you're able to, it's a stereo field. One thing to keep in mind is that you have, just like with the front of house, you have your panning to play around with, you have lots of placement. With ears, it's really beneficial because it immediately makes the stage quieter. You don't have speakers on stage. It's better for the artist in terms of hearing protection. Wedges get very, very loud, and you have increased probability of hearing fatigue, whereas if you get a nice pair of in-ear monitors, hearing fatigue doesn't happen as quickly, and you have a little bit more control over how loud that volume is, and then they're able to hear themselves very, very clearly, as opposed to having a wedge all the way far away from them, in addition to all the stage noise that's happening around them. So with the stereo field of in-ears, you can, especially for drums, you can do some really cool stuff, like having the entire kit pan drummer's perspective, so that you've got your snare on the left, and then you've got the toms on either side, so you can create kind of like a rock album within their own ears. But also remember to keep in mind, so you're not just sending volume when you're mixing ears, and if you're mixing ears, you want to have a pair of ears or headphones yourself so you can listen to what they're listening to. Also, gating is really useful when you're mixing ears. It eliminates excess noise below a certain threshold. So similar to compression, where there's thresholds of where it starts to compress, where the gate opens is the threshold for the gate. Another thing with ears is that you don't have to do as much EQing, you don't have anything to ring out. It makes it a lot more breathable. There's less risk of feedback on your stage. With wedges, there's always that risk of feedback, so you have to make sure that you ring it out really well. There's an increased amount of stage volume, and it's not as safe for your artist's longevity if they're always on wedges. So if you ever have a long-term relationship with an artist and they're just using wedges, definitely try to have that conversation with them where they get on ears, because it makes it a lot easier for you, it makes it safer for the artist, and they can hear things better, and it also makes your front of house engineer really happy because there's less stage volume to deal with. Very important thing to note also is be careful where you apply your compression. If you are running monitors on a split, you never ever want to compress the voices at all. Reason being, especially with downward compression, what a compressor does is it decreases that dynamic range of the voice. So if there's that ceiling, that threshold, the voice is not supposed to push past that threshold. That's the point of the compressor, is to bring that volume down. If that's there, you're causing your artist to strive to sing above that threshold oftentimes, especially if they need more volume. So this can cause them to strain their voice because they're singing louder than they need to. If you are running monitors from front of house, so you're sharing that gain structure, if you put a compressor on the voice, it will affect what they're hearing in the wedge or their ears. So just be careful not to compress too much and only just, shave off a little bit. Have a really, really low ratio with a quick attack and release, just enough to kind of put a little polish on it. Another thing is you might be tempted to put a master compressor on your aux bus just to kind of make it sound nice and glued together. Again, this is not necessarily the greatest idea because of that dynamic range is something that the artist needs to hear in order to know how loud they are and be able to hear all of those transients and the breathability of that mix. When you're sending to ears versus sending to a wedge, it's the same thing. You're still using outputs for your monitor sends. The only thing is, oftentimes you're going to be sending in stereo instead of in mono. A single wedge can only provide a mono mix. You can bring in multiple wedges to create a wider stereo field if that's something that you would like, but oftentimes you're only going to have one wedge per person on stage. Ears provide the benefit of a stereo mix directly for that artist and also creates a quieter stage environment for the performance. Now with a stereo ear mix, you want to make sure that when you're mixing for monitors on ears, that you either have a pair of ears of your own or you have a pair of headphones that you can use so you can listen to the stereo field and hear exactly what it is that they're hearing. And you can create a really incredible mix for an artist. And with ears, you can send, it's a little bit easier and cleaner to send effects to them, so you can put in some reverb to make it sound a little bit more breathable. But again, you don't want to affect it too much because this is a monitor mix. They need to be able to hear a very accurate response to what the instrument actually sounds like or what their voice actually sounds like. You need to replicate it as closely as possible. Another reason why you need to be able to have access to hearing exactly what it is that the artist is hearing, so always carry those headphones with you to every gig. Oftentimes artists don't have the same vocabulary that engineers do when it comes to the sound that they're trying to create. So you'll hear words like muddy or dark to describe you have too much low mids, you have too much low end, and you need to take some of that out. You might hear words like bright or sparkling or metallic. Metallic usually coincides with high mids, and then really bright is usually your highs. So there is some vocabulary that is pretty indicative of certain frequencies. But always keep in mind that you want to be able to hear what they're hearing because they might not know to say, hey, this sounds dark or bright. They might say something like, hey, this sounds really purple to me and I want it to sound more yellow. And it's up to you to figure out what that sounds like. So at that point, that's when you would get up on stage and you would listen to the wedge, or you would put on your headphones and take a listen and make sure you know exactly what is happening with your artist. And always check in with them and make sure that they're really comfortable, especially during sound check, that they can hear everything that they need to and that no changes need to be made.